People like you exist to serve people like me. Those were the last words that Harrison Wells pronounced before his eyes rolled back and his 63-year-old body collapsed on the gleaming floor of the hospital that bore his name. Act 1, Introduction. The silence that followed was absolute. None of those present in the luxurious meeting room on the 20th floor dared to breathe for a few seconds. Not even Sofia Mendez, the head nurse who had been the target of that public humiliation, moved a muscle. For 7 years, she had dedicated her life to that hospital, climbing from newly graduated nurse to head of the pediatric oncology department. 7 years of sleepless nights, of wiping tears from children fighting to survive, of hands held in final moments. And now, in front of the entire board, the most powerful man in Manhattan had reduced her to a servant. The 34-year-old woman observed, still paralyzed, as Harrison's body fell like a marionette with its strings cut. It was Dr. Amanda Lewis, medical director, who reacted first, running to the Millionaire's side. Code Blue. We need a resuscitation team here immediately. The executives, all in their impeccable suits, stepped back as if death were contagious. Only then did Sophia awaken from her trance, her professional instincts overriding the humiliation. In 3 quick steps, she was kneeling beside Harrison, checking his pulse. Weak and irregular pulse. I need to start CPR, she said, already positioning her hands on the man's chest. He still has a pulse. Compression isn't needed, Dr. Lewis corrected, the acidic tone in her voice. Before Sophia could explain that she was just preparing for the worst, the doors to the room opened. The emergency team entered, pushing a crash cart. Harrison Wells would be saved, at least for now. 3 hours earlier, Sophia had arrived at the hospital like any other day. Her navy blue uniform was impeccable, her black hair carefully tied in a low bun. Her badge, which displayed the hospital's name in golden letters, Wells Memorial Hospital, swayed slightly as she walked through the familiar corridors of the pediatric wing. "Good morning, Miguel," Sophia smiled as she entered room 402. The 8-year-old boy, with large brown eyes that seemed to occupy half of his thin face, looked up from the book he was reading. "Sophia, did you bring it?" he asked, the expectation visible in his fragile smile. Sophia pretended confusion. "Bring what? Was I supposed to bring something today?" Miguel rolled his eyes. "You promised you'd tell me the end of the astronaut story." With a laugh, Sophia sat on the edge of the bed. "Of course I brought it. A Mendez never breaks a promise, remember?" She paused, checking the heart monitor and adjusting the IV. "But first, how did you feel after chemotherapy yesterday?" "Normal. A little tired. Threw up twice." Sophia nodded, making notes on her clipboard. Miguel was in his 3rd round of treatment. Leukemia, the type that comes back when you think you've won, the type that transforms parents into shadows of worry and children into little warriors. "Sophia," said the boy, his voice suddenly serious, "do you think I'll be able to go home soon?" The question hit Sophia as it always did, a direct blow to the chest. She knew that honesty was crucial, but she also knew the power of hope. "We're working on it, champ. The doctors are very happy with how you're responding to treatment this time." It wasn't exactly a lie. Miguel was indeed responding better than in previous attempts, but he was still far from being discharged. "Now let's get to the astronaut story." She changed the subject, her tone animated again. As she narrated the adventures of the lonely astronaut who found life on a distant planet, Sophia checked vital signs, adjusted medications, and observed subtle signs that no machine could capture. This is what made her exceptional at her job, the ability to be completely present for her patients while performing her duties with meticulous precision. It was in the middle of this story that her pager vibrated, twice. Urgent. "Miguel, I need to answer this," she said, interrupting the narrative. "I promise I'll come back later to finish, okay?" The boy nodded, already accustomed to the interruptions that were part of the hospital routine. Sophia hurried out, checking the message. Extraordinary meeting called by HWW, mandatory presence of department heads, conference room A, immediately. HWW Harrison Wells, the oil magnate who had built the hospital after his wife died of cancer 10 years ago. A man who rarely appeared at the hospital, preferring to manage it from a distance through his board of directors. If he was calling an emergency meeting, something serious had happened. On her way to the elevator, Sophia met Dr. Thomas Chen, head of cardiac surgery and her friend since college days. His normally calm expression was tense. "Do "Do you know what's going on?" she asked as they waited for the elevator. Thomas shook his head. "Just heard rumors. Apparently, Wells is furious about the latest financial results. They say he might cut the assistance program for uninsured patients." Sophia's stomach sank. The assistance program was vital for dozens of children like Miguel, whose families couldn't afford expensive treatments. It was a program she had helped develop, convincing the former board that it was not only ethically right, but also good for the hospital's public image. "He can't do that," she murmured. Thomas shrugged, a gesture that carried years of resignation. "He's the owner, Sophia. He can do whatever he wants." When the elevator doors opened on the 20th floor, Sophia felt the weight of the oppressive luxury that always bothered her in this part of the building. While the patient wings were functional and clean, but basic, the administrative floor boasted imported marble, original artwork, and furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary. In the conference room, a dark wooden table accommodated 20 leather chairs. 18 were already occupied by doctors, administrators, and board members. At the head, standing, was Harrison Wells, tall, thin, with perfectly trimmed grey hair and a suit that certainly cost more than a car. Wells emanated the aura of someone accustomed to having his every word treated as law. His angular face, marked by decades of power and privilege, was contracted in an expression of disgust. "Finally," he said when Sophia and Thomas entered. "Now, we can begin." Sophia took her place in the only empty chair on the side of the table, feeling out of place among the suits and tailored outfits. Her nurse's uniform, normally her armor of pride, seemed inadequate in this environment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wells began, his deep voice filling the room, "I called you here because I recently had access to some numbers that left me, let's say, perplexed." He gestured, and his assistant projected a graph on the large wall screen. Red bars dominated the image. "This," Wells continued, "is the deficit caused by the assistance program for uninsured patients in the last 6 months. $4,200,000 thrown away." "Mr. Wells," interrupted Dr. Amanda Lewis, "with all due respect, the program has been saving lives. We have documented cases of—" "I'm not interested," Wells cut her off. "A hospital is not a charity, Dr. Lewis. It's a business, and I didn't build my empire by accepting losses." It was at that moment that Sophia felt something burning inside her, something that had been fueled by years of seeing human suffering treated as mere numbers in spreadsheets. "Excuse me, Mr. Wells," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "May I present a different perspective?" All eyes turned to her. Wells arched an eyebrow, clearly surprised at being interrupted, especially by a nurse. "And you are?" he asked, the disdain barely disguised in his voice. "Sophia Mendez, head nurse of pediatric oncology." Wells looked at his assistant as if seeking confirmation that there really was a nurse participating in a high-level meeting. "And what would a nurse have to contribute to a discussion about corporate finances?" he asked, provoking some nervous laughter around the table. Sophia ignored the provocation. "The program that you're considering cutting is not just about numbers, Mr. Wells. May I show you how it affects real lives?" Without waiting for an answer, she opened her folder and removed some photographs. She walked around the table, placing them one by one in front of Harrison Wells. "This is Miguel, 8 years old, recurrent leukemia. Without the program, he would have died after the first relapse. This is Sophia, 5 years old, neuroblastoma. Today, she's in remission." Photo after photo, story after story, Sophia presented the faces behind the numbers. The room was an absolute silence. Wells looked at the photographs, his face an unreadable mask. "Miss Mendez," he finally spoke, his voice icy, "your demonstration is moving, but completely irrelevant to the discussion at hand." Sophia felt the blood rise to her face. "Irrelevant? These are human lives, Mr. Wells. And this is a business, Miss Mendez. Perhaps in your world of bandages and thermometers, feelings are currency. In my world, what counts are numbers at the end of the quarter." "The hospital bears your wife's name," Sophia said, knowing she was treading on dangerous ground. "Elizabeth Wells died of cancer. You built this place in her memory. Do you think she would approve of this decision?" Wells' face lost all color. For a moment, Sophia thought he would fire her right there. But then something more dangerous happened. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You have courage, Miss Mendez. I'll give you that." He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, a gesture that Sophia would come to recognize as his nervous tic. But you clearly don't understand how the real world works. It was then that Harrison Wells uttered the words that would change everything, fixing his gaze directly on Sophia's eyes. People like you exist to serve people like me. And then, with a look of surprise, his eyes rolled back and he collapsed on the gleaming floor of the hospital that bore his name. Act 2. Development of the conflict. The news spread through the hospital like wildfire. Harrison Wells, the ruthless billionaire, had collapsed during a meeting and was now fighting for his life in the ICU of his own hospital. The diagnosis: ruptured cerebral aneurysm. Condition: critical but stable after emergency surgery. Sophia didn't go home that night. After the incident in the meeting room, she automatically returned to the pediatric wing, performing her tasks like a well-programmed robot. She checked medications, comforted a child in the midst of a pain crisis, filled out reports. But her mind was miles away, reliving the moment when Wells crumbled. "You couldn't have known," said Thomas, finding her in the locker room at the end of the shift. "No one knew about the aneurysm." "It's not that," Sophia replied, rubbing her tired eyes. "It's that for a second, Thomas. For a single second. When he fell, I hesitated." Thomas frowned. "What?" "I hesitated before helping him," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "It was just a moment, but it happened. And a nurse should never hesitate, no matter who the patient is." Thomas put his hand on her shoulder. "Sophia, you're human. He had just humiliated you in front of everyone. It would be strange if you didn't feel something." "But that's the point," she insisted. "It shouldn't matter. The oath we took doesn't come with exceptions for people who treat us badly." Before Thomas could respond, Sophia's cell phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "Hospital now. Room 817. Urgent. EW." "EW," muttered Thomas, reading over her shoulder. "Elizabeth Wells has been dead for 10 years, Sophia replied, confused. "Who could—" "Emily Wells," Thomas said suddenly. "The daughter. She rarely appears in public, but technically, she's vice president of the board." Sophia had never met Emily Wells. The heiress of the Wells empire was known for her reclusiveness, appearing only on rare social occasions and completely avoiding any direct involvement with the hospital, despite her official position. Rumors about her ranged from mental health issues to a tumultuous relationship with her father. Room 817 was one of the most luxurious private suites in the hospital, reserved for VIP patients. When Sophia arrived, she found 2 security guards posted outside. They checked her identification before allowing her entry. The room looked more like a 5-star hotel suite than a hospital room. Spacious with elegant furniture, a large window offering a view of Central Park, and medical equipment discreetly integrated into the environment. Harrison Wells was lying on the bed, unconscious, connected to monitors and respirators. Beside him, seated in an armchair, was a woman that Sophia immediately recognized, despite never having seen her in person. Emily Wells was in her early 30s, with the same penetrating blue eyes as her father, but in a softer face framed by short blonde hair. She was dressed with elegant simplicity: black pants, white shirt, no jewelry except for a small watch on her wrist. "Miss Mendez," Emily said, standing up. Her voice was calm, controlled. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Sophia nodded, uncertain about the protocol. "May I ask why I was called?" Emily indicated a nearby chair. "Please sit down. I have a proposal for you." Sophia obeyed, noticing that Emily did not look directly at her father in the bed. "You know what happened to my father, obviously," Emily began. "What you don't know is that the doctors are worried. The surgery was successful, but he remains in an induced coma. If he wakes up, there could be significant sequelae." Sophia kept her face neutral, though her mind was racing with medical possibilities. Brain damage after an aneurysm could range from mild cognitive deficits to severe permanent disabilities. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. Emily made a dismissive gesture. "Don't be. My father and I are not close, as you probably know." She paused, studying Sophia. "What you may not know is that we have very different views on how the hospital should be run." Sophia remained silent, waiting for Emily to continue. "I heard about what happened in the meeting," Emily went on, "about how you defended the assistance program, about how my father reacted, and about what he said to you." A wave of shame hit Sophia. The public humiliation was now known throughout the hospital hierarchy. Her career was probably over. "I also heard," Emily continued, that after my father collapsed, you were the first to act, that you initiated the emergency procedures that saved his life, despite the way he treated you. Sophia shifted in the chair, uncomfortable with the praise. It was just my job. No, Emily said, leaning forward. It was more than that. It was integrity. And that's exactly what I need right now. She stood up, walking to the window before continuing. My father is now officially incapacitated to make decisions. As vice president of the board, I temporarily assume operational control of the hospital. She turned to face Sophia. And my first decision is not only to maintain the assistance program, but to expand it. Sophia felt a wave of relief, immediately followed by confusion. That's wonderful, Miss Wells, but I still don't understand why I'm here. Emily smiled slightly. Because I need someone who knows the hospital from the inside. Someone the staff respects. Someone who puts patients above all else. She paused. I want you to be the new director of patient services, reporting directly to me. The shock must have been visible on Sophia's face because Emily quickly continued. The salary would be 3 times what you currently earn. You would have the authority to implement changes in all wings. And, most importantly, you would have my full support. I don't know what to say, Sophia stuttered. I'm just a nurse. I don't have administrative experience to… You have exactly what I need, Emily interrupted. Frontline experience, compassion, and the courage to face my father, something few people in this hospital have demonstrated over the years. Sophia looked at Harrison Wells, motionless in the bed. And when he wakes up? Emily's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. If he wakes up and if he's in a condition to resume his duties, we'll deal with that when it happens. She extended her hand. So, do we have a deal? Sophia hesitated. The offer was tempting, real power to implement changes she had dreamed of for years. But something about the situation bothered her. The speed, the timing, the father-daughter dynamic that was clearly more complicated than it appeared. May I have a day to think about it? She finally asked. Emily seemed surprised, but nodded. Of course, but I would like to have your answer tomorrow. There's a lot of work to be done. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She had spent the entire night thinking about Emily's proposal, weighing pros and cons, imagining scenarios. Her first stop was Miguel's room. The boy was still sleeping, his peaceful face contradicting the battle his small body was waging. Sophia checked his readings, adjusted the IV, and noted some observations. That's when she realized she wasn't the only one in the room. He looks so fragile, said a female voice behind her. Sophia turned, surprised to find Emily Wells standing in the doorway. He's stronger than he looks, Sophia responded automatically, entering the protective mode she assumed with her patients. Emily approached the bed cautiously, as if fearing to wake Miguel. Is this one of your special cases? The ones you showed my father? Sophia nodded. Miguel is in his 3rd round of treatment. Without the assistance program, he wouldn't be here. And his chances? Better than they were. 50% maybe. Emily studied the sleeping boy for a long moment. You know, my mother died of cancer when I was 22. My father built this hospital with part of her family's fortune, not his. Sophia didn't know how to respond to this unexpected revelation. Emily continued, her voice low. He really loved her, believe it or not, the only human being that Harrison Wells ever loved besides himself. Emily moved away from the bed. In the beginning, this hospital was really about saving lives, about ensuring that no one else suffered like my mother suffered. But at some point, it became just another asset in his portfolio, another monument to his ego. Why are you telling me this? Sophia asked. Because I want you to understand why I need you. Emily turned to face her. Not just for your experience or compassion, but because you see people as my mother saw them, as human beings, not as numbers in a spreadsheet. Sophia felt the weight of the decision she needed to make. If I accept, what happens to my current patients? To Miguel, you can maintain direct supervision of specific cases if you want, but your impact would be much greater. You could help not just 20 or 30 children, but hundreds. Miguel's heart monitor beeped, indicating he was waking up. Sophia automatically adjusted the controls, ensuring he wouldn't feel discomfort. I accept, she finally said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Emily smiled, a smile that for the first time seemed genuine. Excellent. We can make it official after you finish your shift. She walked to the door, but stopped before leaving. Oh, and Sophia? One of your first tasks will be to review my father's case. I want you to be the head nurse responsible for his care." Emily's smile no longer reached her eyes. After all, people like him need people like you, don't they? With those words, she left, leaving Sophia with an uncomfortable feeling that she had just made a pact with a different devil, but no less dangerous than Harrison Wells. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of meetings, accelerated learning, and adaptation to a totally new reality. Sophia discovered that her new position came with a spacious office on the 19th floor, a personal assistant named Rachel, and a schedule so packed that she barely had time to breathe, much less visit her former patients in the pediatric wing. Emily proved to be an impatient but effective mentor, introducing Sophia to the intricacies of hospital administration with the efficiency of someone who knows the system intimately, despite her apparent distance from the hospital over the years. "You didn't need to put me on the budget committee," Sophia protested after a particularly tense meeting where administration veterans barely disguised their disdain for the promoted nurse. "On the contrary," replied Emily, typing quickly on her tablet as they walked down the corridor. "It's exactly where you need to be. The power of a hospital isn't in the operating room, Sophia. It's in the room where they decide how much money goes to which department." Sophia was learning that Emily, despite her apparent devotion to the humanitarian cause, was a cold and calculating strategist. Each of her moves seemed part of a complex chess game whose complete rules Sophia still didn't understand. Amidst this dizzying professional transformation, Sophia maintained a daily routine that anchored her: visits to Harrison Wells' room. As the head nurse responsible for his case, she personally checked his vital signs, supervised the nursing team, reviewed medical reports, and occasionally, when no one else was around, talked to him. Wells remained in a coma, although the doctors had reduced the sedation. Each day, the concern grew. Why wasn't he waking up? The exams showed brain activity, but it was impossible to determine the extent of the damage until he regained consciousness. "He looks just like an ordinary man this way," commented Thomas one afternoon, finding Sophia in Wells's room. "It's hard to believe this is the same person who terrorized the entire hospital." Sophia observed Harrison's relaxed face, the lines of arrogance softened by deep sleep. "I think that's what illness does. It reduces us to our most basic essence." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Philosophical today, huh? The new position is transforming you." "I don't know if for the better," Sophia answered honestly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm losing my moral compass in this administrative world. All these meetings, policies, power games, it's so far from what made me want to be a nurse." "But think about the good you're doing," argued Thomas. "The assistance program has been expanded. 3 children who would have been refused last month were admitted this week. That's real, Sophia." She knew he was right. She was already seeing tangible results from her new position. But the price seemed increasingly high. "Emily wants me to cut the rare disease research department," she confessed in a low voice. "Says it's a money drain with insufficient return." Thomas frowned. "That doesn't sound like someone committed to the hospital's humanitarian mission." "Exactly what I thought." Sophia mechanically adjusted Wells's pillow. "When I question decisions like that, she says we have to make tough choices and prioritize resources for the greatest impact." "Sounds like Harrison Wells talking." "That's what worries me," Sophia murmured. "The methods are different, more subtle, but sometimes I wonder if the end goal is really as different as she wants me to believe." Before Thomas could respond, Wells's heart monitor emitted an alert. His heart rate was increasing. "He's responding to some stimulus," said Sophia, immediately in professional mode. She took a small flashlight from her pocket, opened Wells's eyelids, and checked the pupillary response. "Pupils reacting. Dr. Chen, I think he may be emerging from the coma." Thomas quickly examined the patient. "I'll call the neurologist. Keep monitoring." Alone with Wells, Sophia noticed something that made her freeze. His fingers were moving. Small spasms, almost imperceptible, but definitely voluntary movement. "Mr. Wells, can you hear me?" she asked, following the protocol for patients emerging from a coma. Harrison's eyes fluttered but didn't open. His lips, however, moved slightly. Sophia leaned closer to try to understand what he was trying to say. Careful. The words were just a breath, almost inaudible. "Mr. Wells, I'm Sophia Mendez. You're in the hospital. You had an aneurysm, but you're getting better." Harrison's eyes finally opened, just a slit. They wandered around the room, disoriented, until they found Sophia's face. A flash of recognition crossed his gaze. "Nurse," he managed to say, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Emily, don't trust." At that moment, the door to the room opened and Emily Wells entered, followed by Thomas and Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the chief neurologist. "Father!" exclaimed Emily, her tone of surprise almost convincing. "You're awake." Harrison tried to say something more, but Dr. Jenkins was already by the bedside, conducting a rapid neurological assessment. "Mr. Wells, I'm Dr. Jenkins. Can you squeeze my hand?" "Great. Now can you tell me where you are?" While the doctor conducted her assessment, Emily pulled Sophia into a corner of the room. "What did he say before we came in?" Sophia hesitated. There was something in Emily's tone, an urgency that went beyond filial concern. Nothing coherent. "He's confused, as expected." Emily studied her face for a moment, as if looking for signs of lying. "Of course. Effects of prolonged sedation." "Exactly," agreed Sophia, keeping her face neutral. "Miss Mendez," called Dr. Jenkins, "please request a new set of exams, CT scan, EEG, and a complete blood panel." "Immediately, doctor." Sophia headed for the door, relieved by the opportunity to leave the room and Emily's penetrating question. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing deeply. Harrison's broken words echoed in her mind. "Emily, don't trust." What exactly was Harrison Wells trying to warn about? And what would be the consequences if Emily found out? Act 3, Crisis and Confrontation. A week after awakening from the coma, Harrison Wells remained in the hospital, now in a regular room, although still luxurious. To the doctor's surprise, his neurological recovery was progressing remarkably well. His speech, initially slurred, was becoming clearer every day. His motor coordination, although still compromised on the right side, was constantly improving. What wasn't improving was his temperament. The nurses in the wing began to request transfers after facing the sharp tongue and impossible demands of the convalescing billionaire. Sophia, as the one responsible for the team, ended up personally assuming a large part of the daily care. "This is cold," complained Wells when Sophia brought his breakfast. "How do they expect me to recover with food that not even a dog would eat?" Sophia placed the tray on the adjustable table. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Wells. Happy to see that your sense of drama remained intact after the aneurysm." To her surprise, Wells let out something like a laugh. "At least you don't treat me like an invalid." "Because you're not one?" Sophia checked the intravenous medication. "In fact, your recovery has been remarkable. Even the neurologists are surprised." "I'm used to exceeding expectations," he replied, his familiar arrogance reappearing. Then, looking around as if checking if they were alone, he lowered his voice. "Emily was here this morning." Sophia nodded, keeping a casual tone while checking his vital signs. "Yes, she mentioned she would come before the board meeting. She asked about my intention to resume control of the hospital." Sophia froze for a second, then continued her tasks. "And what did you say?" "That I'm still evaluating my capacity." Wells paused. She didn't like the answer. Sophia didn't know how to respond. In the last few weeks, working alongside Emily, she had seen both the brilliance and the ruthlessness of the woman. Emily had implemented positive changes, expanding assistance programs, improving working conditions for nurses, but also made severe cuts in areas she considered non-priority. "Miss Mendez," continued Wells, using a tone that Sophia had never heard from him before, something close to vulnerability. "I don't know who to trust in this hospital currently. My daughter. Our relationship has always been complicated." "Mr. Wells, I don't think I'm the right person to—" "You are exactly the right person," he interrupted. "You hated me, but you still saved my life and have cared for me adequately. That demonstrates character." Sophia felt uncomfortable. "I'm just doing my job." Wells studied her for a moment. "Before the aneurysm, I would have agreed with that assessment. People like you exist to serve people like me. Remember? Words that were almost the last of my life." Sophia remained silent, vividly remembering that moment. "When you're on the brink of death," continued Wells, looking out the window, "things that seemed certain suddenly seem questionable." "Near-death experiences often cause re-evaluations of values," Sophia commented clinically. Wells looked at her again, an ironic smile on his lips. "Always the professional. Well, let me be direct then. I have reason to believe that my aneurysm was not entirely natural." Sophia frowned. "What? That's a serious accusation, Mr. Wells. Cerebral aneurysms are well-documented medical conditions that can be induced by certain substances. Wells adjusted himself in the bed, wincing in pain as he moved his right arm. In February, I had a complete checkup, brain scan included. No sign of aneurysm. They can develop rapidly, especially in people with hypertension and high stress levels. As I said, always the professional. Wells sighed. I'd like to make a request. I want you to obtain my complete medical record for the last 6 months, and I don't want anyone to know, especially Emily. Sophia felt torn between her professional duty, her loyalty to Emily, who, after all, was her boss, and her growing uneasiness about the true intentions of everyone involved. Why would I do that? Because you swore to help patients, and because if I'm right, I'm not the only one in danger in this hospital. You seem distracted, observed Emily, as they walked down the corridor after the budget meeting. Any problem? Sophia adjusted the folder she was carrying. Just tired. I'm covering some nursing shifts due to staff shortages. That shouldn't be your responsibility now, Emily frowned. You're the director of an entire department, not a nurse on duty. I'm still a nurse, Emily, and I like direct contact with patients. It keeps me connected to the reason we're all here. Emily studied her for a moment, then smiled. Your dedication is admirable. That's why you're so valuable to me. She checked her watch. I have to go. Meeting with potential investors for the new experimental treatments wing. See you tomorrow at the ethics committee. Sophia nodded, watching Emily walk away. As soon as the woman disappeared into the elevator, Sophia quickly changed direction. Instead of going to her office, she headed to the medical records department. Using her new high-level access, she managed to obtain Harrison Wells records without raising suspicions. The information technology was definitely an advantage of her new position. Formerly as a nurse, she would have needed additional authorization. Back in her office, Sophia closed the door and dived into the document. After an hour of meticulous review, she found something notable. In Wells' blood tests from the last 3 months before the aneurysm, there were consistent traces of a substance that was initially classified as one of the drugs prescribed for his hypertension. But Sophia knew pharmacology. The drug in question had a similar name, but a significantly different molecular structure from an experimental vasodilator that, in high doses, could weaken the walls of blood vessels. God, she murmured, checking the dates. The substance began to appear in routine examinations approximately 2 months before the aneurysm. But how would someone administer this to Wells regularly without his knowledge? And who would have the access and knowledge to do it? Sophia opened Emily Wells' personal file, looking for any indication of medical or pharmaceutical training. There was nothing beyond an MBA in business administration. But then, in her professional history, a detail caught her attention. Before withdrawing from public life, Emily had worked for 3 years at Wells Pharmaceuticals, a subsidiary of her father's conglomerate, specializing in cardiovascular medications. The final piece of the puzzle came when Sophia reviewed the registered visits to Harrison Wells. In the 6 months preceding the aneurysm, Emily had resumed bi-weekly visits to her father, something she hadn't done for years, according to the hospital's longest-serving employees. Sophia's cell phone vibrated. A message from Rachel, her assistant. Dr. Lewis, looking for you. Urgent. Sophia quickly stored the documents in her locked drawer and headed to the medical director's office. Dr. Amanda Lewis, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for inflexible competence, was not known for urgent summons without a serious reason. Close the door, Lewis instructed as soon as Sophia entered. Her normally composed face showed evident signs of stress. We have a problem. What happened? Lewis pushed a tablet in her direction. I just received these results from the laboratory. Confidential toxicological analysis that I requested on Harrison Wells' blood from that sample we collected yesterday. Sophia examined the results, her heart racing. The report clearly identified the compound she had just discovered in the previous records. Did you know about this? Asked Lewis, studying Sophia's face. I just discovered something similar in the old records, Sophia admitted. Who else knows about this? No one yet. I requested the test using my authority as medical director outside the normal channels. Lewis ran her hand through her hair, a rare gesture of nervousness. Sophia, this is poisoning. Someone tried to kill Harrison Wells. And almost succeeded, Sophia completed. The question is, who? Lewis looked at the closed door, then lowered her voice even more. Emily Wells has been visiting the hospital's pharmaceutical laboratory regularly in the last few months. They say she's supervising research. You think Emily tried to kill her own father? Think about it, argued Lewis. Who has more to gain? Emily has always been the reluctant heiress. Harrison never let her assume significant responsibilities in the empire, despite her technically being vice president of several companies. With him incapacitated, she assumes control of everything. Sophia felt sick. She had worked closely with Emily, believed in her vision for the hospital. Had it all been a facade? We need concrete evidence before making any accusation, said Sophia, and we need to ensure that Harrison is safe in the meantime. Lewis nodded. I agree. I've already discreetly changed his medical orders. No medication administered without my direct authorization or yours. And we've started checking everything he consumes. Emily can't know that we suspect. She's very smart. At the slightest sign, she might disappear. Or worse. Worse? If she really poisoned her father, what would stop her from doing the same to us if she feels threatened? The weight of the situation fell upon them. They were no longer just dealing with hospital politics and power games. They were potentially facing a criminal willing to kill. We need a plan, said Lewis. The plan was simple in theory. Gather enough evidence for a formal accusation while protecting Harrison Wells without alerting Emily. In practice, however, it proved to be an exercise in extreme caution and nerves of steel. For 5 days, Sophia and Lewis worked discreetly, requesting laboratory access records, comparing them with Emily's visits, and documenting every anomaly found. Thomas Chen was eventually brought into the circle of trust, as they needed an additional doctor to help with Wells's protection. On the 6th day, Sophia found what they were looking for: security footage showing Emily in the pharmaceutical laboratory after normal hours, manipulating what appeared to be a substance in a small vial. The date coincided with one of her registered visits to Harrison. This still isn't conclusive, warned Thomas when the three met in an empty conference room in the middle of the night. She could argue that she was just checking the research, as she claimed to be doing. But combined with the toxicological tests and the pattern of visits, it starts to form a convincing picture, replied Lewis. Sophia studied the camera images again. There was something in Emily's behavior that seemed too familiar. She moves like someone who knows the laboratory well, not like an occasional administrator. We need something more direct, decided Lewis. Irrefutable proof. Sophia bit her lip. What if we confronted her? With what we already have. Too risky, Thomas shook his head. If we're wrong, our careers are over. If we're right, we've alerted a possible assassin. We need to involve the authorities, Sophia concluded. We have enough evidence for a formal investigation. Lewis agreed. I'll discreetly contact a detective I know tomorrow. Meanwhile, we need to keep Wells protected and... The door to the room opened abruptly. Emily Wells entered, followed by 2 men in suits whom Sophia recognized as part of the hospital's private security team. Night meeting? Emily asked, her casual tone contradicting her cold eyes. Should I presume I wasn't invited due to an administrative oversight? Sophia's blood froze. How had Emily discovered their secret meeting? Lewis was the first to regain her composure. Emily, we were just reviewing some numbers for tomorrow's presentation and... Spare me the lies, Amanda, Emily interrupted, her voice cutting. I know exactly what you're doing. She gestured to the 2 men. Please escort Dr. Lewis and Dr. Chen out. Their hospital privileges are temporarily suspended pending investigation for unethical conduct. What? Thomas stood up. You don't have the authority to... As interim CEO, I have exactly that authority. Emily smiled coldly. She then turned to Sophia. As for you, Miss Mendez, I'd like a word in private. Lewis and Thomas were forced to leave, vehemently protesting. The door closed, leaving Sophia alone with Emily and the incriminating files spread across the table. You know, Emily began, sitting casually in the chair that Lewis had occupied. I really trusted you. I thought we had the same vision for this hospital. Sophia remained firm, though her heart was pounding. I believed that too, Emily, until I discovered what you did. Emily raised an eyebrow. And what exactly do you think you discovered? We know about the poisoning, Sophia said directly, deciding there was no more reason to pretend. The toxins in your father's blood tests, your visits to the laboratory, it all fits. To her surprise, Emily didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, almost seeming relieved. Finally, she said, someone competent enough to see the obvious. So you admit it then? You tried to kill your own father? Emily leaned forward, her intense blue eyes. "Sophia, you're smart. Smarter than that. Do you really think that if I wanted my father dead, he wouldn't be dead? The dose I administered was carefully calculated to cause exactly what it caused, a severe aneurysm, but not immediately fatal." Sophia tried to process this partial confession. "So you admit that you poisoned him, but claim you didn't want to kill him. Why? To incapacitate him and take control." "To save him," Emily replied, surprising Sophia. "Or at least, to save what remains of his humanity." "What?" Emily stood up, walking to the window that showed the lights of Manhattan. "My father wasn't always the monster you met, Sophia. When my mother was alive, he was different. Tough in business, yes, but capable of compassion. He built this hospital with a genuine mission." Sophia remained silent, trying to understand where Emily was going with this. After her death, something broke inside him. Year after year, he became colder, more calculating. The hospital ceased to be a memorial and became just another business. Patients became numbers, employees, disposable resources. Emily turned to Sophia. "You heard him in that meeting room. People like you exist to serve people like me. That's what he became. So, you decided to poison him? That's your idea of family intervention?" Emily laughed without humor. "I tried everything before. Conversations, family therapy. I even threatened to sue to take control of the family shares. Nothing worked. He was untouchable, and he was destroying my mother's legacy." She paused. "The compound I used was originally developed as a treatment for vascular dementia. In controlled doses, it increases neural plasticity. In higher doses, it weakens the walls of cerebral vessels," Sophia completed, her medical knowledge connecting the dots. "You induced an aneurysm to what? Reformat his personality. To give him a second chance," Emily corrected. "A restart. You work in the medical field. You know the cases of patients with brain injuries who emerge with altered personalities. Gentler, more emotionally connected." Sophia shook her head, horrified by the twisted logic. "You played God with your own father's neurology." "And it worked," Emily insisted. "You've seen him before and after. He's different, more reflective, less cruel." "He's like that because he suffered brain trauma, not because you cured him of his previous personality." Emily shrugged. "The result is what matters, and now the question is, what do we do from here?" Sophia felt cornered. Emily had confessed to a very serious crime, but with a justification that complicated everything. And now, Lewis and Thomas had been removed, leaving her alone to deal with the situation. "I'm going to the police," decided Sophia. "What you did is criminal, regardless of your intentions." "Before making that hasty decision," Emily said calmly, "there's something you should see." She extended a tablet. "Familiarize yourself with this document. It's my father's new will, signed yesterday." Reluctantly, Sophia examined the legal document. Her heart sank as she read the clauses. Harrison Wells had left complete control of the hospital to Emily, with specific instructions. If Emily were removed from the position for any reason, the hospital would immediately be sold to a health corporation known for transforming non-profit institutions into profit machines. "He told me he was reassessing his priorities," Emily explained. "Said he wanted to step away from business to focus on his recovery, but he ensured that his achievements remained intact." She took the tablet back. "In other words, even now he put safeguards for his ego. If I fall, the hospital falls with me." "Blackmail," murmured Sophia. "Family preference," corrected Emily. "So, Sophia, the choice is yours. Report me, watch the hospital be sold and dismembered, all the programs we implemented dismantled, or work with me to continue improving this institution." Sophia felt the impossible weight of the decision. Her moral integrity versus the well-being of hundreds of vulnerable patients. "Why are you giving me this choice? Why not just fire me like you did with Lewis and Thomas?" Emily smiled. "Because, unlike my father, I recognize talent and integrity when I see it. And because I believe that when you weigh all the variables, you'll make the rational choice." She walked to the door. "I've taken the liberty of revoking your access to my father's room for now. You can return tomorrow with your decision." When Emily left, Sophia collapsed in the chair, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had just discovered and the impossible choice before her. Sophia didn't go home that night. Instead, she wandered the hospital corridors, visiting patients in the pediatric wing as they slept, seeking clarity in their peaceful faces. Around 4 in the morning, she found herself in the hospital chapel. a small, non-denominational space on the third floor. She wasn't particularly religious, but she needed a quiet place to think. "I thought I might find you here," said a voice behind her. Sophia turned, surprised to see Harrison Wells in a wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse she didn't recognize. Without his usual arrogance, without the weight of power, he seemed smaller, more fragile, more human. "Mr. Wells, you shouldn't be out of bed," she said automatically. Wells dismissed the nurse with a gesture. The man hesitated, then left, leaving them alone. "My daughter blocked your access to my room," said Wells directly, "and suspended Lewis and Chen. It's not hard to guess why." Sophia saw no reason to lie. "We discovered what she did to you. The poisoning." Wells nodded slowly. "And now she's put you in an impossible moral dilemma. Typically Emily. You knew? Not about the specific poisoning, but I know my daughter." Wells maneuvered the wheelchair closer. "She's always been like this. Brilliant, ruthless, convinced of her own moral righteousness. Like father, like daughter." Sophia couldn't help commenting. Wells chuckled softly. "Yes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." He became serious again. "But there's a crucial difference between us. I never tried to hide what I am. Emily wraps her most terrible actions in noble justifications. She said she tried to save you, give you a second chance. Do you believe that?" Sophia hesitated. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Did she tell you about the will? The hospital sale clause?" Sophia nodded. "It's true," Wells confirmed. "I signed it yesterday, but not for the reasons she imagines." He looked directly into Sophia's eyes. "I signed because I wanted to see what she would do, how she would use it." Sophia frowned. "I don't understand. My daughter and I have been playing this game for years, Miss Mendez. She sees me as a villain. I see her as a dangerous idealist. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle." Wells sighed. "The aneurysm really did change something in me. Not my basic personality, but it clarified certain things, made me see the consequences of my way of acting, of our way of acting. What does this have to do with me? You're the variable that neither of us predicted. Someone genuinely committed to the patients, with no personal or family agenda." Sophia struggled to process what he was suggesting. "What do you want from me exactly?" "I want you to do exactly what your conscience tells you," Wells replied simply. "If that means reporting Emily, do it. If it means working with her for the greater good, do it. But don't fool yourself into thinking that any choice will be pure or perfect. What about the hospital? That clause in the will can be easily revoked if I'm alive to do it." Wells smiled ironically. "Just a small detail that Emily ignored in her rush to use it against you." The nurse returned, signaling it was time to take Wells back. Before leaving, the billionaire said one last thing. "Whatever your decision, Miss Mendez, remember, in this world we rarely choose between right and wrong. Usually, we choose between different shades of grey." Act 4. Resolution. Dawn found Sophia sitting in the small park adjacent to the hospital, watching the first golden lights touch the Manhattan skyscrapers. In her hands, an envelope containing her letter of resignation and a flash drive with all the evidence of Emily's crime. The night of reflection had not brought easy answers, only the certainty that any path would have profound consequences. Her mind wandered to Miguel, the boy with leukemia, whose life depended on the assistance program that Emily had expanded. But she also thought about the fundamental principles that had led her to nursing. First, do no harm. Her phone vibrated. A message from Thomas. "Lewis and I were officially fired. Allegations of patient confidentiality violation. Emily is closing in. Be careful." Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she needed to make. In less than an hour, she would have a meeting with Emily to communicate her choice. When the clock struck 8, Sophia entered Emily's office carrying only her purse. The Wells heiress was waiting, impeccably dressed, apparently rested despite the events of the previous night. "Sophia," Emily smiled, indicating a chair. "I presume you've reflected on our conversation." "Yes?" Sophia sat down, maintaining eye contact. "I want to be very clear about something before communicating my decision. I don't approve of what you did. It was unethical, illegal, and morally reprehensible, regardless of your intentions." Emily's smile faltered. "I understand your position, but I'm not finished." Sophia raised her hand. "I also want to say that, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't hesitate to report you to the authorities. Crimes aren't justified by positive outcomes." Emily folded her hands on the desk, her posture tense. "And in the current circumstances?" Sophia took a deep breath. In the current circumstances, I'm considering the broader impact. Hundreds of vulnerable patients depending on the programs we implemented together. Children like Miguel, who wouldn't survive without the treatment they receive here. So, you're choosing pragmatism over absolute principles. Emily visibly relaxed. A sensible decision? No, I'm choosing to take responsibility for the well-being of patients, even if it means compromising my own moral standards. But I have conditions. Emily raised an eyebrow. Conditions? First, Lewis and Thomas will be reinstated immediately, with clean records and compensation for professional defamation. They know too much. They are excellent doctors whose only fault was showing integrity. You'll find a way to ensure their discretion. Emily hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Acceptable. What else? Second, the assistance program will be permanently incorporated into the hospital's constitution with guaranteed funding of at least 15% of the annual budget. 10%, Emily automatically counted. 15. It's not negotiable. Sophia remained firm. And lastly, I want legal guarantees that your father will receive the best possible treatment and will be protected from any additional intervention on your part. Emily studied Sophia for a long moment. It seems you've spoken with my father. I had that opportunity, yes? And he fed your suspicions about my intentions. Sophia kept her face neutral. He shared his perspective, just as you shared yours. It's up to me to form my own opinion. After a tense silence, Emily laughed softly. You're truly remarkable, Sophia. When I promoted you, I thought I was elevating someone who could be easily molded. Instead, I found an equal. She extended her hand. I accept your conditions. We have a deal. Sophia shook the offered hand, aware that she was making a pact with someone capable of poisoning her own father. We are not equals, Emily. We never will be. But we can work together for the good of the patients. As she left the office, Sophia felt simultaneously victorious and defeated. She had secured protection for the patients and programs she considered vital, but at the cost of leaving a serious crime without formal punishment. Her path inevitably led her to Harrison Wells' room. Her access had been restored, as promised by Emily. She found the billionaire sitting in an armchair by the window, looking stronger than the night before. Miss Mendez, he greeted, indicating the opposite chair. Or should I say, Director Mendez? Sophia is fine, she replied, sitting down. I came to check your vital signs. And to tell me your decision, I imagine. Sophia nodded. I made a deal with your daughter. I'll keep her crime secret in exchange for guarantees for the programs and patients. Wells didn't seem surprised. The middle path, pragmatic. Perhaps not heroic, but human. I don't feel good about it, confessed Sophia. I feel like I've betrayed my principles. Principles are luxuries, Miss Mendez. Necessary, valuable, but sometimes impractical in their pure form. Wells adjusted himself in the armchair, wincing in pain. You know what I've learned in 63 years? That life rarely allows us to be immaculate heroes. Instead, it challenges us to find the best possible compromise in impossible situations. Sophia studied the man before her. Still arrogant, still privileged, but somehow changed, not by a neurological miracle as Emily had hoped, but by the simple human experience of vulnerability. What happens now? She asked. Now, replied Wells. We all continue. I recover. Emily manages the hospital with your ethical supervision, and you continue doing what you've always done, putting patients first. That's simple. Hardly. Wells smiled ironically. This piece is temporary at best. Emily and I will eventually collide again. It's our nature. But perhaps, with you in the middle, we can cause less collateral damage. Sophia rose to leave, but Wells stopped her with one last observation. Your hands aren't completely clean now, Sophia. Welcome to the real world, where doing good often means getting a little dirty. 6 months passed since that fateful morning in Emily's office. The hospital thrived under the joint administration of the two women, one providing the strategic vision and resources, the other ensuring that humanity was never sacrificed in the name of profit. Harrison Wells recovered enough to return to business, though with a less dominant presence. He now divided his time between the business empire and a newly discovered passion for philanthropy. Genuine this time, not just for public effect. The dynamic between father and daughter remained tense, but contained within the limits of professional civility, with Sophia often serving as mediator in inevitable impasses. On a sunny autumn afternoon, Sophia was making her usual rounds in the pediatric wing when she came across a familiar face she hadn't seen in months. Miguel, now 9 years old, was sitting in one of the chairs in the waiting area wearing normal clothes instead of hospital pajamas. Miguel? Sophia approached, hardly believing her eyes. The boy was visibly stronger, with full cheeks and a healthy glow to his skin. "Sophia," he smiled, running to hug her. "I came for my follow-up appointment. Dr. Chen said I'm officially in remission." Sophia's heart raced. "Miguel, that's wonderful!" She hugged him tightly, tears threatening to escape. The boy's mother, Eleanor, approached. "He really wanted to see you. He says you're his favorite nurse, even though you're now an important director." Sophia laughed. "For you, Miguel, I'll always be your nurse." Later, after completing her administrative tasks for the day, Sophia headed to the balcony on the 20th floor. The sunset painted the Manhattan sky with shades of orange and pink, the city below slowly transforming into an ocean of lights. Emily found her there, offering a cup of coffee. "Tough day?" "Revealing day," Sophia corrected, accepting the drink. "Miguel is in remission." Emily smiled genuinely. "The boy from the 3rd round of chemotherapy? That's excellent. He's just one of dozens we've managed to save with the expanded program." Sophia looked at Emily. "In moments like this, I can almost forget how we got here." Emily's expression darkened slightly. "Regretting your choice?" Sophia gazed at the horizon again. "No, just recognizing its complexity." She paused. "You were right about one thing, Emily. Sometimes the outcome matters more than the method. But you were also wrong about something important." "What?" "The idea that people like me exist to serve people like you and your father." Sophia turned to face Emily directly. "The truth is that we all exist to serve something greater than ourselves. For some, it's power or wealth. For others, it's compassion or justice. What matters is not our position, but what we choose to do with it." Emily studied Sophia for a long moment, then raised her cup in a silent toast. "To moral complexity and impossible choices." Sophia returned the gesture, aware that her own moral journey was far from over. Just like Harrison's recovery, the transformation of the hospital and the continuing evolution of her unlikely partnership with Emily, everything remained in flux. There were no clean endings, only new chapters waiting to be written. As the last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, Sophia reflected on the words that had started it all. "People like you exist to serve people like me," and how such a simple phrase had triggered a cascade of events that transformed 3 lives and an entire hospital. The universe apparently had a peculiar sense of irony, and perhaps an equally peculiar sense of justice. And